All right, welcome. I'm Ed Walsh. Thanks for joining me for this workshop called Grants, Gifts, and Gems Galore. There are incredible opportunities available through our strategic partnerships, from high-quality training to a stockpile of resources to financial assistance for our churches and pastors. But before we unpack those opportunities, let me ask you, do you operate out of scarcity or abundance? Because how we view the world impacts how we live in the world. Proverbs says, as a man thinketh, so is his heart. Do you see the world out of the lens of God's abundance? Or is your world filtered by the pie is only so big? Scarcity says, if someone takes a bigger slice of the pie, then I'm going to get a smaller slice. Kind of have that scarcity mentality. Abundance is mom saying, hey, by the way, go take as much pie as you want because there's 2 more in the oven. Man, that would be a delight. The world says that you can order medium-sized pizzas, but God says, I have extra large party-sized pizzas. One of the first songs I learned at church was, He owns the cattle in 1,000 hills, the wealth in every mine. Goes on to say, wonderful riches more than tongue can tell. He is my Father, so they are mine as well. That's from Psalm 50. Jesus operated from abundance in every area of his life, from the feeding of the 5,000 to forgiving others 7 times 70. I saw this again when the unruly mob came to arrest Jesus in the garden. Peter grabs his sword and he's ready to take a slice of the guy's head, and Jesus says, would you put your sword away? Don't you realize I can call on my Father and he at once will put at my disposal more than 12 legion of angels? 12 legions, that's 72,000. 72,000 would take that little mob and squash him like a bug. And Jesus didn't even say it was 72,000. He said, I have more than 72,000. That's abundance. God can provide for my needs right now in abundance. Paul said God can do more than we can ask or imagine for you, for your church, in abundance through resources you may not even be aware of. True story. There was an attorney who practiced many years ago. He practiced in a small town in Ohio. At times his clients didn't have the money to pay him. So this is what he'd do. He'd say, you know what? Just agree, if you would agree to sign over the mineral rights to your property, then we'll call it even. Now this attorney never married. And when he died, he left his estate to his only sister. His sister never married, and so when she died, she left her estate to different organizations around town, including 2 of the churches, the Presbyterian Church and the Friends Church. Now that Friends Church over the years might have gotten about $500 from some of those mineral rights as they were extracting some coal, but then all of a sudden Marcellus Shale came. Natural gas was being extracted, and the Friends Church received a 6-figure royalty a few years ago. 6 figures. That allowed them to repave the parking lot, to remodel the building, to reach out into their community, to help supplement their budget. That's God's abundance. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills and the wealth under those hills. Do you operate out of abundance or scarcity? Why have I spent so much time discussing God's abundance? Well, it's because every good gift is from the Father. And these grants are a gift from God and also from generous believers. There's training material, there's money available to our churches and our pastors, and we did not work for it, we didn't earn it, we don't deserve it. They're gifts from generous believers. Now, there's 2 different grants that we're going to discuss today. You may have heard of the Eli Lilly Pharmaceuticals. Their foundation is funded through their family. So we have the Lilly Endowment. It's one of the largest private foundations in the United States. And they have a passion for churches and pastors. So we're participating in 2 different Lilly-funded grants. One is through the NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals, And the second is through Everence Financial, which was formerly Mennonite Mutual. Both of those programs focus on the financial health of pastors and churches. Now I'm going to break these down over 5 categories. First, we have churches. There's church assistance, then there's church training. And then we have a focus on pastors. And there's pastor assistance and pastor training. And then finally, those two merge together into what we call the Bless Your Pastor Appreciation Program. So financial assistance for churches, that's the first thing we want to talk about. Now the good news is most of our churches, they don't need help. Many of our churches experience consistent giving during this pandemic. Others have actually gone up, if you can believe that. God has just really increased that, so we give thanks to God there. And then several of our churches received help from the CARES Act. They enrolled in the Payroll Protection Plan. And finally, some of our churches had reserves already in the bank before the outbreak ever came. They were prepared if the offerings went down. Reminds me of Genesis 38, where Joseph stored up treasures for those lean years. But some of our churches have been hit negatively. Families have lost their jobs. Unemployment has hit hard. So their giving obviously has decreased. If that is your church, then please apply for assistance. We have grants that are available up to $5,000 if you have a solo pastor, or up to $7,500 if you have multiple staff. You would go to naefinancialhelp.org/EFC-ER. That's going to be on your handout. All of these resources will be there. But to be part of that, there's some things that you need to do as a church. So for the church assistant requirements, first of all, there's some financial records that we need. We need income statement, balance sheet, how much you have in reserves. We just want to be able to help there as well. But also, you do need to participate in the Bless Your Pastor program. So as you go to that website, the pastor needs to establish an account on that NAE website. A designated lay leader, could be an elder or the treasurer or church finance person. They also need to establish an account on that website as well. And they are to provide that information. So the financial records, you log on, and then to participate in the Bless Your Pastor program. Now, how are we able to do this? It's because Eastern Region designated $25,000 from our general fund, some of our reserves, and then the NAE Lilly grant matched that with $25,000 additional to that. God provided a larger pizza. We went from medium to extra large. That's God's grace. Well, that covers financial assistance for our churches. It's all on the website, the stuff that you need to do, a few questions to answer. If you've got more questions, then email me or text me and let me know what that is. Now, there's another part of this as well, and that is leadership training for our churches. I'm really excited about that. You know, I graduated in accounting, worked for over 30 years as a business administrator for a church. But the truth is, we accountants, we kind of look back. We look at history. Financial reports always tell us what already happened. Most churches often function like us accountants. Tend to look back. We're trying to just remember what happened there. But 15 years ago, I was given a new assignment. This was my assignment, was to help create a culture of generosity. I was to form a team that was going to look forward. Now, quite honestly, back then, there were not many resources available, but we began researching and implementing best practices. But I really wish that this NAE grant was available back then. NAE has produced resources for your board. There's 6 video lessons that are short enough to be incorporated into your already scheduled meetings. So if you meet monthly, you can do this. Some of the videos are as short as 3 or 4 minutes. A few are up to 14 minutes, but you can watch them as a team, and then you can discuss that material. Within 30 minutes, you've covered that. So over a 6-month period, you can cover financial, creating generosity at your church. So you consider some of those best practices that are shared. You're going to be already doing some of them. I know you're doing some of those. But others, you may say, boy, we never thought of that. And you may begin doing that. So the material includes a planning calendar for you to help schedule implementing these best practices. I strongly encourage your church board to take advantage. It will be a significant investment for your church in creating a culture of generosity. And also to spur you on, once you complete that and you let NAE know that, NAE is going to send your pastor a $200 gift card. That's one of the gifts. Now, why all these gift cards? Because generosity is caught more than taught. Healthy churches are generous churches, which is related to our third topic, the Bless Your Pastor Appreciation Program. Church leader, your pastor has been navigating uncharted waters. He or she has been leading in unprecedented ways, from learning to preach to a camera, to directing difficult decisions while trying to figure out when we should reopen, how we should reopen, all the time when there's members who are having opposing opinions. Quite frankly, many of our pastors they've been running on adrenaline overload. So to encourage you, I want you to, as a church, to say thank you. And that Bless Your Pastor initiative is a perfect opportunity to express that appreciation. So what do you need to do to be part of that? Well, first of all, let me tell you, there's a 7-minute video for your board. So you can watch that. They'll outline that, but I'm going to also give you an overview as well. Then they've created a Bless Your Pastor, 50 Ways to Bless Your Pastor brochure, and you would distribute that to your entire congregation on whatever day you decide to do that. It's got great suggestions there from, encourage you to say, to prepare a meal for your pastor, or baking some goodies, or offering free babysitting as well. There's so many different ways. You know, Brenda and I celebrated our 39th anniversary this year. Yes, kudos to Brenda, I agree. And every year we received a card from a couple from our church where we were first married. You know, we've moved away. We've moved 4 different times. And yet they keep finding us and they bless us with appreciation year after year. It's such a small thing. You know, John Maxwell says it takes so little to be above average. It took a little amount of time and a card, but the thought is just greatly increased. So you want to do that, distribute 50 ways to bless your pastor, then receive an offering. You're going to announce it. This is going to be a special offering as a blessing to your pastor. You report that to NAE on their website. You let them know how much that you collected. And finally, NAE is going to rejoice with you because they also want to send a $250 gift card to your pastor as part of that blessing. So, great opportunity. Now, here's some questions that I've been asked on this. First of all, what if we have more than one pastor? Do we do it for all of our pastors? And I'm going to say, yeah, please include everyone. Now, the board may decide that it's divided up equally, or they may say, you know what, a few of our staff are part-time, and so we're going to divide it proportionally. But do include all of your pastors. Here's another question. Will every pastor then receive a $250 gift card? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. The grant did limit it to 1 per church, and they're going to send that to the lead pastor. But again, that's a great blessing. And then finally, is an appreciation offering like the Bless Your Pastor, is that taxable? I always get that question from our accountants. And the answer is yes. This should be included on their W-2. Matter of fact, any special offerings like that for your pastor, Christmas offering or whatever it is, you should include those on though. But the biggest question is why? Why should we even do this? 1 Thessalonians, Paul said, respect those who labor among you and esteem them very highly in love because of their work. We want to bless our pastors. We want to esteem them. We want to honor them in love. Now, before we move on to the last 2 opportunities, I want to remind you that everyone is on a generosity journey. Now, that truth has serious consequences on how we address finances at church. Matter of fact, I wrote, what are the implications for addressing finances in the church? Well, let's think through the scenario. Suppose that your church furnace died and you discover that it's going to cost $10,000 to fix. Your church normally has about 100 people who attend. Have you ever heard this? You know, if everyone would give $100, we can fix that furnace. Or maybe you need $50,000 to renovate your fellowship hall. And someone said, you know, if everyone would just give $500, we can renovate the fellowship hall. You know, that math is right. But it's the wrong solution. Why is that? Because not everyone has equal capacity. Financially, we're not all created equal. You know, Paul addressed that in 2 Corinthians when he said, your plenty will supply those in need. He was talking to the Corinthians and he said, God has given you riches. And the Jerusalem church is suffering right now and they are really lacking. And so your abundance is going to help meet that need. Maybe you've heard this solution. You know, if everyone would just tithe, we'd have plenty for our budget. We'd exceed our budget. You know, that's a true statement if everyone did tithe. But what's wrong with that statement? It assumes everyone is equally spiritually mature. Is that true in your church? I doubt it. You know, if all your church members were equally spiritually mature, that means you don't have any baby Christians. That means that lost people aren't getting found. We should have all variety of folks on this generosity journey. That wouldn't be good if that was the case. And so we want to give as God has blessed us as well. Now, you know, your folks fall into one of three categories. They're all on this generosity journey, and some are struggling financially. They're in debt. They're living paycheck to paycheck. I often think of the story of the widow's mite where she gave, but she didn't have much. You've got others who are stable. They have financial margin. They're working towards long-term goals. They're making ends meet there. And finally, we have some who have surplus. They have more than enough. I think of the rich young ruler that Jesus encountered. You know, Jesus addressed each group differently. And your church needs to address each group differently as well. You know, for the struggling, you want to help them either through Financial Peace University or Crown Materials to help them get on a budget, to help them eliminate their debt, to help them to get on a plan. Again, Financial Peace University by Dave Ramsey is a real popular item that many of our churches use. But what about the stable? Probably many of them tithe. But the reality is we all need to grow in generosity. Tithing's not the end game. That's not the goal line. Have you ever thought about who were the most faithful tithers in the New Testament? It was the Pharisees. Do you want a church of Pharisees? No, absolutely not. You want people who are generous disciples. One resource that I encourage is Andy Stanley has a 4-week video called How to Be Rich. It goes over 1 Timothy 6. It's a great resource. There's others there as well, so we'll have those listed on your handout. Finally, what about surplus? This is where we want to address estates and their wills. You know, our wealth is our greatest asset, not our source of income, but the accumulated wealth, and that's the one that's most often neglected by our churches. Very few people include their church in their estate. Now, NAE has a video training for that to address estate planning. It's a very helpful thing. I know my wife and I have been working through that and reconfiguring how we're going to address things, but I encourage you to do that in terms of your estate. And finally, I want you to think through not only these different stages, but in terms of ages, how are you addressing your youth and your children? When do people start giving 10% or more? Very interesting study came out here. When did you start giving 10% or more? Almost a third, 27%, were as a child or a teen, and then another 33% did so in their 20s, right as they got their first job, as they started moving out of home. So 2/3 of our folks established generous giving habits within their teen through their 20s. And so I encourage you to say, how are you addressing that with your, do you have that for your children? Do you have that for your teens? Do you have some type of systematic training on living generously? You know, at my last church, one of the things we did after we offered Financial Peace University is we had several people, when they asked for feedback, said, man, I wish I had this when I first got married. We took that feedback and said, you know what? Every one of our newlyweds, everyone who's been married 5 years or less, we just went back and we said, if you want to take Financial Peace University, we're going to subsidize over half of the cost. Normally it costs maybe $100, maybe even more by now. But our church would take out of our benevolence funds 50% of that cost, because we said, this is important. So encourage you to invest in your young people. Now let's move on to the last two grant opportunities. First of all, there's financial assistance for pastors. The Lilly Foundation, they're passionate about financially healthy pastors. They don't want money concerns to distract our pastors. So there's financial assistance available. Help pay off student loans. Maybe there's medical expenses. Maybe there's some other crisis that came along. They're willing to help on that. Now there's two different grants for this, and I'm going to have to explain these because they're somewhat different. One is there's pastor assistance through the Everence program. This was actually unfolded and rolled out a year ago, but if you have not applied for this assistance yet, it's not too late to do it. They still have funds on that. So one is from Everence. What does that include? Well, first of all, they will give up to $5,000 to help pay off, say, your student debt or medical expenses. And then they also factored in that they would give you another $1,000 because this would be taxable income. And so they're going to give you $1,000 to pay the taxes. Great planning. Encourage you to do that. Now, here's the catch on this one. It's a matching grant, so a church needs to match half of that. So up to $3,000 would need to come from the church, and then the Lilly Foundation pays the other $3,000. So encourage your church. Maybe you can do that out of benevolence or some different fund that you have available, or maybe it's part of the Bless Your Pastor offering. You say, we're going to designate some of that for paying off a student loan. However you want to do that, encourage your church to take advantage of this. This is a great opportunity. It's a huge return on the investment. But what if your church doesn't have that? You're the pastor and you're saying, that's just not an option at my church. Well, here's what I would do if I were you, pastor. I would ask my church if it was possible for me to adjust my budget. I would say, please reduce my salary by $3,000 over the coming year. And would you again apply that instead, send that directly to Everence for this program? You would have to do that. In the big scheme of things, that would be worth the sacrifice. Because if that happened, then you would have $5,000 of debt being paid off, and then you would get a check for $1,000 to help pay the additional tax that happens on that loan forgiveness. Now that's from Everence. Requires a church match. If you want to do that, you need to contact Colin Saxton. He's with Everence, and that information is on your handout. Now there's a second grant for pastors. Pastor assistance through the NAE. This is the new grant that just came out this year. Let me say this about the NAE grant. One, it's not a matching grant. So the church doesn't need to chip in part of that, or you don't need to reduce your salary by part of it. The second is it's up to $5,000 for debt. And the way this one is structured, it's actually tax-free through December 31st. Through December 31st, it's tax-free. And so you get that benefit of that. Now, that was courtesy of the CARES Act that got passed. They just included that as part of that. Now, what are the requirements that need to happen if you want to get this assistance? Even though there's not a match, there are some requirements. So first of all, you need to watch the Bless Your Finances training. Not to be confused with Bless Your Pastor. This is Bless Your Finances training. It's about 35 minutes long. My wife and I watched it. It is packed with helpful tips. It will inspire you, and it will encourage you to trust God more fully as your provider. Now the second one here, second requirement is you need to watch at least one other training session with the elders or the finance team. And they did one standalone. I already talked about there could be a 6-part. If you can do the 6-part, then once you do session 1, you've met this requirement. But otherwise, if you're not doing that 6-part series with your church board, they have a 1-part session that would talk about estates and grants, estate planning for your church there. So that is the NAE pastor assistance requirement there. Now, beyond pastor assistance, many of you don't need that. Some of you can take advantage of it. But there's 3 pastor training opportunities as well. Financial training that's there. 3 of them, 3 different options. One is there's the God is Your Provider 6-session course for you. They're each 90 minutes long. 90 minutes, not a video, but of you doing work as well. That's through NAE, God is Your Provider. Brian Kluth put that together. It's excellent. There it gives you resources, tools, practical help. It helps you to move beyond just budgets to the bigger picture of how God wants to grow you in generosity. If you complete this session, there's another gift available. $100 gift card comes at the end once you complete that, Pastor. So a lot of opportunities for some gift cards here. Second one is through, again, through NAE. It's the Financial Peace University class that Dave Ramsey offers. It's an online cohort with other pastors. It would be 9 90-minute sessions as well. You would have to complete each of those. But that is a second training opportunity. So you may want the God is Your Provider, or you may say, you know what, I've never taken Dave Ramsey. I really want to take advantage of it. I hear such great things about it. And so NAE has covered all the costs to Dave Ramsey's organization so that you can take this for free. Here's the third one. There's a grant for you to meet with a financial planner. That's through Everence. Now, I have to admit that I'm getting close to retirement. I'm getting closer every day. And I'm not the only one. There's several pastors that are along that journey with me, closing in on the finishing line here. Now, I need to tell you, I held a CPA license for over 15 years. My wife and I are fairly frugal. We've been saving. We've been trying to be generous at the same time. Finances comes naturally to us. But we are so glad we met with a financial planner last year. He provided a comprehensive overview of our situation. He evaluated with objective eyes. He held us accountable on things that are so easy to procrastinate. You know, like updating your will, or getting a will, or updating beneficiaries, or deciding, we were trying to decide when should we start taking Social Security. He gave us just a great plan on all of those things. He also helped us tweak our investment portfolio. When you're younger, you want to really see it grow. When you get a little bit later, you may want to preserve more. So we tweaked exactly where our investment portfolio should be. We found it extremely helpful. Especially older pastors, encourage you to take advantage of this. Now here's how this grant works. You pay $200, Lily Grant pays $1,000 to Everence. So it's a $1,200 value. That's what the financial planner would normally charge for his services. It is very comprehensive. He put a lot of time into that. They've got the software and whatever to make those things happen there, to project what you need there. But what a great investment. That was a super investment on our part, a $200 fee that we paid, and then Lily paid $1,000 there. Lily wants pastors to be free from financial worries so we can focus on making disciples. That's their heart. That's their desire. And that's why I am so excited that Eastern Region is able to partner with Everence and with the NAE and to make these grants and these gifts available to you, pastor, and to you, church leader, as you grow in your generosity. Now, the workshop handout tells you who to contact, tells you where to log on. If you still have questions, you can email me, you can give me a call. Here's what Paul said in Philippians 4:19. He said, "And my God shall supply all your needs all your needs, not some of your needs, not a few of your needs, but all of your needs, according to his riches. Not your riches, not what you have in your bank account, not your church's riches, not these grant riches. No, according to his riches in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so may God bless you as you live in abundance and trust him to be your provider. May God bless you.